Hello and welcome. I am Ramayad and I am Director of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council. Today marks an important milestone in the Center's Afrocentury initiative as we launch Senior Fellow Aubrey Hubri's new report entitled Priority for US-Africa Commercial Policy in the Biden administration. We are deeply grateful to the Africa Finance Corporation and their president and CEO, Samaila Zuberu, for their patronage of this work. This is probably one of the most relevant reports I have read about the first steps of the Biden presidency. It is not just a report, it is even a roadmap drawn with the intelligence and audacity that characterize Aubrey. And I don't want to say everything, you'll find out when you read it. As Aubrey notes in the report, there are many regions of optimism based on the new administration's early actions on Africa. Be it's reversing hurtful travel bans, appointing a historically diverse cabinet, or restoring a more traditional tone in Washington, D.C. However, truly advancing US-Africa policy requires new thinking and a concerted approach. This is where we hope Aubrey's report will be particularly used. And we are thrilled to have an estimated panel today to provide insights on key themes of US-Africa business engagement, climate finance, and people-to-people ties through the creative industries. I'll now hand it over to Aubrey, who leads our work on economic prosperity and commercial policy, for a brief presentation of the report before leading a moderated discussion. Aubrey, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Riyad. It's such a pleasure to be here today with all of you and to speak a little bit about things that I'm very passionate about, and many of us on this panel are, which is how to build stronger commercial ties between the US and African nations. This report comes at a fortuitous time, not just because of the change of the administrations, but also because of an intersection of two things. One, an intersection of our own realizations and recognitions in the US about the need for a more commercial and investment-oriented approach to African markets, and meta trends that have been taking effect in African economies over the last 20 years. And so the Biden administration is stepping into a moment that is this intersection that allows for a greater integration of African countries into overall foreign policy objectives. And this is contrast to what we've seen in the past, which has been a traditional siloing of Africa policy. So traditionally, it's been Africa policy is kind of in the corner, defined by issues that are unique, supposedly, to Africa, whether that be the HIV/AIDS battle or the challenges around electrification. However, you see even this week with the climate change summit that President Biden will be hosting, that African nations are a part of this effort. And so we are going to see more mobilization across cross-cutting issues, including climate change, democracy promotion, diversity, and inclusion. So I want to break down into this unique moment in the intersection of the realization and the meta trends. So when I talk about the realizations that have happened in Washington in Africa policy, I'm talking about the last 20 years where we saw a shift from aid to trade, which was represented by the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which became law 20 years ago. So that shift from aid to trade happened. But then what failed to happen, and what kept AGOA from realizing all of the ambitions we all had for AGOA, was the lack of an investment corollary. And there wasn't enough investment into productive capacity into African markets that would allow then for the exports for the world to consume, including in the US market. And so we now see, with the emergence of Prosper Africa, with the creation of the Development Finance Corporation, and with the reinvigoration of US Exim Bank over the last 4 years, you see a recognition that we need to facilitate investment into African markets. And I'm thrilled to be going into a panel soon with 3 investors in the region. So this aid to trade to investment shift has been significant. And I think we're really only on the cusp of figuring out the best way to mobilize investment. At the same time, that's happened to a realization in Washington that there is a world of global competition that needs to take place. And that's come with the view that China is now risen and has economic prowess that needs to be somehow countered or at least matched, or an American offering made in a value proposition to partners all over the world. And so this realization is happening in Washington, intersect with these meta trends in African markets that include them being the youngest, being increasingly connected, increasingly urban, and increasingly integrated. So young, connected, urban, and integrated now define African markets. And that makes the commercial opportunity even greater for US companies. Because now when you have young, urban, connected consumers, they're easier to reach in cities. It's not the last mile, costly last mile problem that has defined the last 20 plus years of business in emerging markets. And you have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So the historic coming together of African countries to create one market allows for larger market opportunities for American companies. So the commercial, I think, imperative is strong. You do have, by 2030, the continent will have 17 or more cities with more than 5 million people. Europe only has 4, North America only has 2. And those cities will have people in 680 million people with smartphones. And that smartphone is the device, the window to the world, the shopping device, the education device, the entertainment device for so many. And this larger market, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement presents, will constitute about $6.7 trillion of consumer and business activity by 2030. And so as we emerge from this COVID period, we are coming back to African countries and economies that are more diversified, more robust, and IMF is projecting about a 3.5 to 4% growth rate in 2022. And you see the response from the investor community. You see, even during COVID, over $1 billion was raised for venture in investing in venture capital opportunities in African markets. And African startups were really gaining a lot of attention. And so I look forward to hearing from Visa in particular about some of the startup investments that Visa has made. And we know that the climate imperative that the Biden and challenge that the Biden administration has put forth in Washington also applies to Africa policy. And that challenge has been that every agency of the US government has to have a climate policy and a climate approach. And that impacts all the agencies that are relevant to the commercial relationship with African markets, whether they be the DFC, USAID, XM Bank, USTDA, and others. And that investment ability that is embedded in those entities really can help to close the investment gap that exists for climate investments for African countries. The World Bank estimates that sub-Saharan Africa needs about $15 billion annually to implement climate mitigation measures. And that's on top of a very large infrastructure gap of somewhere between 70 and 100 billion that sits on the basic infrastructure. So climate infrastructure requires even more financing. And we know that that financing must come from the outside in part. So that's why we're also thrilled to be joined by PA from the Green Climate Fund, the largest private investor in climate and renewable projects. And so lastly, I think there is a huge opportunity around people-to-people ties. And we're thrilled to be joined on this panel by Moa Budu from Ebony Life TV, because her work really represents the power of US and Nigerian, in this case, relationships and building platforms that reach young people, that create opportunity in both countries, create jobs, et cetera. So I look forward to talking with her. Let me quickly just summarize some of the recommendations that exist in this report, and I encourage you all to read it. On the commercial policy side, we would like to see Prosper Africa continue. And because Prosper Africa has made some significant progress, we'd like to see Prosper Africa continue, especially the coordination mechanisms that undergird Prosper Africa. but believe that it needs to have a sectoral focus, that to the outside world, to our African partners and to American companies, as we go to mobilize investment, we need to be centered around a few sectors, whether that be creative industries, digital infrastructure, agriculture, financial services, whatever they are, we need to choose 2-3 priority sectors so to ensure that Prosper Africa has the ability to mobilize capital. I also argue for a special focus on digital infrastructure because we know that there's $100 billion needed to reach universal broadband access in African markets. And we also know that there's a lot of interest growing among the large American tech companies, from Facebook to Microsoft, Amazon to Google. And so there must be a way to build on this momentum to continue to ensure that African young people are connected. On the climate policy recommendations, we really look forward to the US meeting its obligation to entities like the Green Climate Fund. Green Climate Fund is a significant investor in lower income countries like that you find in African markets. And you need that ability for experts to be able to invest capital. And so we look forward to the US meeting obligations. In terms of flagship initiatives, we'd love to see the Biden administration create a commercial core, an update to the Peace Corps, a Peace Corps of the future that is focused on MBA skills, getting young people, young Americans out in African markets to work for some of the companies that we have on this panel, but also to support DFC activities and to do so maybe for debt forgiveness of their student loans in the US. There could be a very interesting platform created that way. And lastly, I argued for a creative industries partnership, a way to create a kind of council for creative industries that would involve leaders in the US and African markets, particularly Nigeria because of Nollywood, and find new ways to finance the creative industries. So with that, I want to turn to my esteemed panel and begin the conversation around what can be done, what companies are already doing, and how we can build on progress. So with that, I would like to first turn to Ambassador Demetrius Marantis, who's the Senior Vice President of Global Government Affairs at Visa. And as I said, Visa has been very exciting in their activities on the continent, growing rapidly. I followed closely the 2019 investment Visa made in InterSwitch, which is Nigeria's largest electronics payments company, and also the other startups in the financial services that Visa is investing in. So Demetrius, tell us a little bit about Visa's footprint in the region and what's exciting you from the market these days.
Oh, Aubrey, thank you so much for having me here today. And what a great tee up to this discussion. I particularly love your characterization of young, urban, connected, and integrated, because that's exactly what we're seeing at Visa. And that's exactly why we're just so incredibly excited about Africa and the business opportunities that are there. Visa's has opened its first office in Africa in 1992. And since that time, we've opened 8 offices, with the most recent addition being in Addis. And, you went through, Aubrey, I don't need to repeat, why Africa is such an incredibly attractive market for US businesses. But what I would like to focus on is, you talked a bit about digital infrastructure and the importance of digitization. That's really what we're finding in Africa. And I think the whole experience that we've all had with COVID has just underscored the trend towards digitization and the importance of being digitally enabled in order to be successful in terms of recovering from COVID.
And we've seen, obviously, transact across digitally, right?
And to transact digitally, but really, Aubrey, just to really be successful from an economic perspective. We have an internal think tank called the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute, which recently did a survey of small and micro businesses in a variety of markets across the developing world, including in South Africa. And the number one thing that small businesses across South Africa and in the other markets we surveyed underscored is the importance of being digitally enabled, the importance of having digital infrastructure, and the importance of just being connected. We saw, in the past year, an acceleration of trends in a matter of months that normally would take place over a matter of years. And I mean, in particular, just the explosion of electronic commerce and electronic means of paying. Some food retailers in Africa experienced a 400% growth. The growth rates in other sectors in the e-commerce space are just staggering. And again, what does that underscore? It underscores that businesses that are digitally connected, that have access to digital infrastructure, are the ones that are going to succeed and thrive in the future. Yeah. That's why we as a company have made a commitment to digitally enable 50 million businesses over the course of the next 3 years. And I can go into great detail as to how we're trying to do that in Africa and what types of policies governments can put into place in order to accelerate those trends. But let me stop there because I have the tendency to go on and on and on.
Well, no, one of the exciting things that I think will undergird this whole conversation, this whole panel, is the digital connectivity. Because whether they're watching Ebony Life on their phones or watching or making transactions, and really Olivier and his work is building that backbone. So for me, I think that's going to be a continual theme here, and it's one that will continue to excite us. One thing I was thinking about was the recently Flutterwave announcement and their expansion. And you look at a company that's maybe 4 or 5 years old that started with a few employees, and now they're in 20 markets. Now, just in contrast, Dangote Group, which we know have existed for decades, is in 14 markets on the continent. So, the ability to expand across borders with asset-light companies and the ability to integrate cross borders is really critical of this sector. So Olivier, I do want to turn to you. And Olivier is the Executive Vice President and President for Latin America and EMEA at American Tower Corporation. And ATC plays a critical role in the backbone of building towers and that broadband connectivity that allows the consumers to get the data and make their ability to do the transactions. So Olivier, can you speak a little bit about your current operations and investments made in the region? We know that you acquired Eaton Towers back in 2019, which dramatically increased your geographic footprint, especially in West Africa. So would love to hear a little bit more about ATC.
Yeah, thank you, Aubrey, and thanks for this introduction. And it's great to see the renewed interest in the African continent from the Americas side. Our company is Boston-based. We are an infrastructure provider. We basically are the middle guy between the consumers and the mobile operators. So whether it's the US, Europe, India, Latin America, and Africa, what we did in the past 25 years is basically buy or build this infrastructure and run it for the operator. The intent being to share the infrastructure between them so that from an environmental standpoint, this is as effective as possible. So initially, of course, we grew the business in the US and then in Mexico, in Brazil, in India. But very quickly we realized the potential and and the opportunity in Africa. You mentioned the size of the population, 1.3 billion people, 53 markets. Of course, the needs in terms of connectivity. So in 2010, we decided to enter South Africa first, and now we're present in 7 markets with around 20,000 towers. And the potential is huge. I mean, not only in business terms, if you're a publicly listed company in the US, but also in terms of corporate social responsibilities. There is a huge role that I think we are starting to play. Not only us, but I think all the companies represented there and all US companies that have decided to invest in Africa to play a role in developing the societies there. Just to give you an example, on the tower side, on the telecom side, very difficult to have access to electricity. So we need to bring solutions to the communities, through technology. It started with diesel generators, to enable those towers to work. Now we invested heavily in people and in technology around wind energy and solar energy, also to make sure that we have sustainable solutions to enable our towers to work. Connectivity for the unconnected. So, trying to reach out also the rural areas of Africa, to bring the internet, to bring the basic connectivity. So we developed what we call digital villages, and there is no kind of business interest there. It's just, to support the communities locally where it's difficult, to get towers and infrastructure in general, so that together with the municipalities, the local communities, all the operators, we could bring this connectivity to the masses in Africa.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been following closely has been the kind of second wave of the internet revolution in India. And a lot of that has come because of the accessibility of data and how the cost of data has fallen so dramatically in India, partly because of Reliance Jio's investments. But, one of the reasons I think there can be an explosion of economic activity if the price of data falls in African markets, and it's going to take increasing investment. How do you see that in terms of ensuring that people have not only broadband, but data? That's how most people are consuming their internet in African markets.
I think the start is really on the regulatory agenda of the government to ensure that there is enough competitiveness in the market so that the local players, can compete and bring the best services at the lowest cost to the consumer. So the good news is that, in Africa, we have big mobile operators, international players that have invested heavily. You mentioned India. So Bharti from India is present in multiple countries there. MTN South Africa expanded across Africa. Orange from France is heavily also in around 20 markets, and the same with Vodafone from the UK. We don't have US operators present in Africa, so that might be an opportunity. But the good news, again, those guys are bringing, the knowledge, the expertise, the funding, so that together with experts from the field, so, us in towers, you mentioned Facebook or Google or Microsoft also to bring, part of the ecosystem there, we can bring the solution at the lowest cost to the consumers in Africa.
Yeah, and it's a multifaceted solution, right? So Google and Facebook are investing in the undersea cables. Those are going to be the billion-dollar undersea cables. But once it lands at the port, whether that be Lagos or Benin, you need to have it distributed across terrestrially. So that's where companies like yours come in. I do want to turn to Aziz. Aziz is the managing director and co-head of EMEA Emerging Markets at Citi. And Citi's, I always hear how aggressive Citi is looking at African markets, and then it's exciting and refreshing because so many global banks have kind of pulled back away from the markets and left particularly African banks in a lurch as they haven't had the correspondent banking partners that they've needed to make global transactions. And the one I always hear is, oh, Citi still does it. Citi's still there. So Aziz, we're glad that you're joining us and glad that Citi's still robustly interested in African markets.
Yeah, thanks, Aubrey. It's great to be here, and hi everyone. Listen, Citi has been in Africa for over 70 years, right? We've been in Africa, north, south, east, and west. We're present in 12 markets across Africa, and we have a long-standing history of doing business in these markets. And it's a lot of institutional knowledge. It's a lot of understanding around the client base, and knowing what the needs are and the growing trends are. You mentioned some of the mega trends coming that you're seeing, and you talked about that. And we're seeing similar mega trends that are happening and impacting in a positive way Africa, which will help it grow in terms of its economic growth and trajectory and general upliftment of the population in Africa. And we want to be a part of that, and we want to intermediate quite a bit of that flow, having the knowledge and history that we have in Africa.
And why do you think Citi's had such a kind of aggressive and proactive approach to the market while maybe others have not? Do you feel like you're stepping into an open space, or what's the kind of, how have you kept up the risk appetite within Citi?
Yeah, listen, I think as a global bank, our strategic objective has always been being a global bank and having presence. We're in over 100 markets globally. And that's been part of our strategic objective as a firm globally for a number of years. And we see that as a strategic advantage. And how do you see that as a strategic advantage? We serve clients in multiple countries, multiple geographies, giving them consistent and superior service across the board. And we play a fantastic role in terms of bringing and connecting countries and clients and trading across the world. And with specific, the topic that is being discussed around Africa, we've done quite a bit of that over a number of years. And what we see is having a consistent, patient policy and a strategy around in Africa, and to make sure that we see the trends that are emanating and getting ahead of those trends and how we can facilitate those in a sustainable and efficient manner is what sets us apart.
Yeah, I want to turn to Paul now, because the Green Climate Fund is the largest fund dedicated to helping fight climate change and has a heavy investment focus on, say, African markets. I talked about these meta trends, and they were all fairly positive, right? The growing population that's young and urban and connected, and this is an ability to reach consumers. But one of the forces that's maybe working against this trend is the impacts of climate change. We know that African countries are suffering some of the most dire consequences, but have contributed the least to the problem. And so how is the Green Climate Fund really thinking about expanding its footprint and doing even more than it's already doing in African markets?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to join you in this discussions. The Green Climate Fund is supporting Africa. As you know, Africa is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world as a continent. And we are providing support to Africa, and our support is based on grants, loans, guarantees, equity instruments to leverage blended finance, and crowding private sector investments for developing countries. Now in Africa, what we are doing is already providing funding to approve and projects under consideration that would create opportunities to develop innovative instruments in African markets. One example is the Subnational Climate Fund Global Fund, which was developed in partnership with Pegasus Capital Advisors, which is accredited to Green Climate Fund and IUCN. And this brings positive disruptive innovation in the way that subnational climate projects are structured and the risk, and then funded by the private and public investors in 42 countries worldwide, including 18 African countries. The Green Climate Fund's anchored commitment of $150 million in this investment is essential in the fact that the investment risk is reduced through first loss position of the Green Climate Fund and then unlocking future investments. Now, through this Subnational Climate Fund, it is helping financing the gap for between 5 to 75 million low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure projects. And this particular project includes resilient infrastructure in water and sanitation, retroactive agriculture and aquaculture, urban development solutions, waste optimization, renewable energy generation, and energy efficiency while promoting nature-based solutions. Yeah. So this project is benefiting almost 17 million people worldwide, and is going to avoid emission of 630,000 tons of carbon emission. And Pegasus would mobilize 750 million, while the GCF provides 150 million.
Yeah, I think, Paul, that's a great example of how we can create structures that de-risk investments into climate finance and unleash the trillions that are being set aside to green investing. One of the concerns that I think we have at the Africa Center, but it's outside as well, is, of these new waves of financing that's becoming available for climate and green finance, how do we ensure that African countries can attract some of that finance? Because the way you define carbon neutral or the kind of definitions that structure those investments matter, especially in many African countries that are missing or already have gaps in transport infrastructure. So they still need more roads, they still need more rail, and those things are traditionally carbon emitting. So, how are you seeing African countries be able to shape the architecture that is going to deliver on these climate finance pledges?
We have what we call a readiness preparatory support program, through which we support countries to be ready to access the resources from the Green Climate Fund to also meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention. And through this, we first strengthen the capacities of the focal points that are the national designated authorities of the respective countries, and support them in developing what we call a country program. So the country program is what brings in the objectives that links the national determined contributions and the climate change strategies and priorities of the countries, through which they would develop priorities of programs and projects that would build a resilient infrastructure or reduce the emissions in their economies. So it goes through policy development, putting priorities in their various sectors through a multi-sectoral, a multidisciplinary approach through which they would consult all the stakeholders to agree on the priorities for the country. And based on those priorities, we further support them to develop concept notes. We also have a facility that is a project preparatory facility that provides grants to countries up to 1.5 million US dollars to really move ideas into fungible, bankable projects that can be submitted to the GCF for further funding.
Yeah, so I think those kind of mechanisms are important, as investors that are new to the space need to build on existing areas of collaboration. And speaking of international collaboration, I did want to turn to Mo Abudu, who's the CEO and founder of Ebony Life. Mo, are you with us from Lagos? You look like you may be frozen. All right, well, we'll come back to Mo when she returns. Let me come to to Aziz and Olivier and Demetrius. You know, one of the challenges I've had in my advisory career is really trying to get American companies to look at African markets with the lens of opportunity rather than risk first. And we know that, for example, many other emerging markets, Chinese or Indian companies, come to the region with a view of opportunity first. They're not blind to the risks, but they don't overemphasize the risks or misrepresent or exaggerate the risks. How do you think, as leading American companies on the continent, we can get the risk-adjusted view right when it comes to reaching out? Maybe I can start with that with you, Demetrius.
Yeah, happy to. Look, Aubrey, you mentioned at the beginning the partnerships and the work that Visa is doing with companies like InterSwitch and Flutterwave. There is just unbelievable opportunity and so much exciting work underway across countries in Africa. You know, we're doing a lot of work with fintechs across the continent. For example, in Cote d'Ivoire, we have a partnership with a small startup called Weblogy, which we're working with them to help develop digital wallet solutions. And as a result of our partnership, Weblogy is working to develop products to serve first-time entrants into the financial services space, you know, in particular targeting Abidjan-based taxi drivers. But we have partnerships across the continent.
So I'm glad you brought that example up, because we have a question from our audience about the SMEs and micro businesses, and how does a small company in Abidjan, a young startup, find Visa? Or how does Visa find these small companies? How are those linkages made?
That's a great question, Aubrey, and we're doing a ton of work to try to facilitate that, to make that happen. So let me give you two examples. One, we host a competition. It's an innovation competition called the Visa Everywhere Initiative. And we just had one very recently in Addis. And it's an opportunity for fintechs to come together and work in terms and how they're going to deliver innovative solutions to help deliver digital payments to underserved sectors of Africa, whether it's in rural and underserved areas, or whether it's in areas in urban sectors that have yet to be penetrated. And that's been a super successful way where we've developed lots of relationships with fintechs across Africa. We also have a fintech initiative called our Fintech Fast Track program, where we, essentially have opened our APIs and really work to accelerate the ability of fintechs to take advantage of our network so that they're able to develop their own products and services based on the Visa platform. And it's been extremely successful. And we have great examples, whether it's in Cote d'Ivoire, whether it's in Ghana, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Kenya, South Africa, name the market, and we're working with fintechs there. And it's just a great example of the need for companies across the ecosystem to partner with each other, because no one company can do this work, this digital transformation work alone. We need to be working in partnerships with companies big and small.
And sharing those success stories is one of the ways we can kind of demystify the markets, right? And address the risk. And Olivier, I'm sure that within your operations, you guys as well are able to engage with local contractors, local businesses, SMEs. How do you interact with SMEs in your supply chain?
Well, to answer your previous question, which I think was very interesting, Aubrey, I mean, remember, historically, this is a continent that where US interests were not necessarily well represented, right? France, the UK, even Italy were historically more present in Africa. And then if you add to it the complexity operationally, to manage operation in Africa, I think that's kind of the hurdles that many US companies still see when they look at Africa. But again, if you think more in the long run, creatively, to tropicalize the way you're working in such, different environment like Africa, you'll be successful. Again, because the potential, the creativity of the people, you're mentioning the SMEs and the talents there, we find plenty of people, with a lot of energy, ideas, and creativity to help us in Africa. So vendors, on the procurement side, of course, to provide us with the right, raw material to run, build, and operate the towers. Talent for our own operations, interest for those guys also to move intra-country. So we have a lot of people very interested to start in Ghana and then move to South Africa, then to Kenya or to North Africa. So a lot of, I think, of opportunities definitely to engage with local talent and local people.
And Aubrey, if I may, just because you asked about risk and we're in the business of risk, and balancing that with opportunity. I think that was your question. I think one has to take a long-term view. There are always cycles, economic or otherwise. And as investors, while the opportunity is there, we have to have a view of taking a longer-term view around and seizing those opportunities. I think that is a very critical thing. A short-term investor and a short-term view, you may catch it on the right side of the cycle. You may actually come on the wrong side of the cycle. I think you laid it out in terms of the opportunity that the continent presents. Youngest population is getting connected. There's a lot of stuff happening, right? So I think a slightly longer term view. The other thing I would say, just to add on to what Olivia just said, I think one of the key things is unlocking finance, right? And unlocking that not only at the top end, but also at the supplier side, right? So, and even at a lower level around the microfinance side. So supply chain finance has become of critical importance, and how you unlock and provide efficient financing to smaller suppliers, to larger corporations. I think that is a very big focus area for us. The micro side, eventually end consumers and growth is very critical for any economy. And the digitization that is happening and at the pace that it is happening, and the sort of combination of digital amongst many sectors, but especially on the micro side, has been key. We helped finance 4G Capital in Kenya, which is a fantastic sort of a combination of digital micro lending. 86% of their clients or even higher are female. They use digital platforms and they needed financing, and we used some of the developmental financial agencies and intermediated those agencies to help provide financing to what is a very critical component in aggregate to any economy.
Yeah, thank you, Aziz. And we are having challenges having Mo on video, and I think that's partly because we need more investments in in digital infrastructure, but we have her with us. And Mo is someone I've known for a long time. I think we first met around a visit I took with Steve Case to Nigeria, where she did a wonderful job moderating. So I want to stand in her footsteps and is a great moderator. But Ebony Life Media has been, so fascinating in the last couple of years. She has content deals with Netflix, with Sony, with Will and Jada Pinkett Smith's Westbrook Studios, with AMC Networks, and you see this expansion of creative industry interest in African markets, with almost every major American music label opening offices. And so Mo, tell us a little bit about what's going on with Ebony Life Media and the way you've been able to build these innovative partnerships.
Aubrey, hi. I'm sorry, guys, that I've had to turn off my video. Yes, so we definitely need more investment in internet connectivity. That's definitely one area. But not to say that we don't have connectivity, because we do. I've seen a massive improvement in the amount of connectivity that we do have. But just to say that, the business opportunity for us in the entertainment sector is, without it sounding like a cliche, it really is massive. And, we can testify to that by, when I look back from 2018 to 2021, and I'm saying to myself, the amount of deals we've been able to get done with international, production studios, really, it's been unprecedented. Now, it's not as if we haven't been out there pitching these projects for years prior to, 2018. But I think it's about, those businesses and those production studios, and they are run strictly, like businesses, like any other sector. It's about identifying and saying where is the business opportunity within this. And I think the time has come, and they have realized that there is an opportunity, and that, we are all digitally connected around the world, and everyone does want to watch content. There are so many different platforms. You've got you've got Netflix, you've got Amazon, you've got Hulu, you've got Disney. there are so many of them right now. And, the thing is, it can take you a year to make a TV series, and you can consume that literally. If you binge watch an 8-part series, you can watch that in 8 hours. So you've spent a whole year sort of, or even sometimes longer than that, creating this project, which is consumed within hours. So therefore, you can see that the world is looking for those stories that it can use to engage audiences around the world. Yeah. Because every single subscriber that you have is paying you whatever dollars per month.
Yeah, so one of the things I love about the creative industry, and just your example of the film or your example of that series, it's a non-rival good. Meaning, like, if I only have one shirt, if I make a shirt in Nigeria, I can only sell it either in Nigeria or in the US market. But if you make content, it can be consumed multiple places all at the same time in different markets. It can be a domestic market production. It could be an export. And so
Absolutely.
that non-rival good is huge.
Absolutely.
Development aspect.
Yes. What tends to happen is that, you can do all sorts of deals whereby someone is buying a particular window. But I have to say that most of the streamers are quite territorial in that they are looking at exclusive deals only. But that's not to say that you can't have a movie that you've made that's gone to the box office where your next window could then be a streamer. But a lot of the streamers are commissioning content that's going directly onto their platforms. And they're doing this Netflix every week, or to Amazon. You can see new shows that typically launched every Friday. But that show that's launched every Friday that's new to you has been in production for the last 12 months. So there's an entire department that's sitting there, that's scheduling, that's speaking to, producers like myself and saying, we need, to start working on a certain number of projects, which is why we have a multiple deal with Netflix on a whole slate of projects, because it takes time to produce them. They've recently moved into the Nigerian market space, and they know that to capture that Nigerian audience, you need to have content that is relatable to that audience. But at the same time, you want to tell stories that are global in nature, that appeals to a wider audience around the world. One of the movies that we made last year was the most watched Nigerian film on the Netflix platform, not just by Nigerians, but by others that just wanted to see a different backdrop, to see a different type of story being told. So that value chain is massive in our industry. Every time that we make a movie or produce a TV series, you've got caterers, people are fed through times a day. You've got costumes, you've got music, you've got graphics, you've got editors, you've got producers and writers, and the value chain is massive in our sector. So therefore, there's that ability to keep empowering, and to keep building, that particular industry. So it's a really great time to be in the industry because it really is booming. Last year, we saw Black Lives Matter movement, which tells you that Black stories also matter, African stories matter. So we're very busy investing in story development because the continent really has remained quiet for a long time. So in terms of, do we have a treasure trove full of stories to share with the world? I believe the reason why all the globals are coming to us now is because our stories are fresh, they're original, and those that are watching around the world want to see things that are fresh. And as I said, at the end of the day, it is a business. They must keep getting their subscribers to keep subscribing. And the only way to do that is to keep giving them fresh, authentic content. Yeah.
Speaking to the business side of it, what are the constraints to growth of the industry? One of the challenges you historically saw in Nollywood was because they couldn't get financing and letters of credit, and the banks, for example, didn't recognize the value of the industry or the business models, that they often had to make low quality films and just make a quick one, sell it, get money, make another one, quick, make it money. They couldn't have the financing cycles that they need. What do you see as kind of what do we need to unlock the next wave of the digital creative revolution in African markets?
Well, I think it's already been unlocked in that, I think there are different levels of content production. I mean, there's very local stories which are made by local producers for local audiences. There are more regional stories that can travel Pan-African wide. And then you've got your global stories that are big and that they're just obviously going to go, around the world. And those global stories are being invested in by some of the partners we have. I mean, the AMC sci-fi series is a big global series. The deals we've done with Sony are big global series. And some of the projects that we have with Netflix are also big global series. And the Westbrook ones are global series. So I think it's really a matter of looking at who you're partnering with, how much are you ready to put into the production in terms of, what is the cost per episode thing. That determines your talent, it determines your backdrop, it determines your director, it determines everything based on the budget you put into it. But that's not to say that there isn't a local market in Nigeria. There's a very local market, that local producers can touch and feel and see, and they're able to empower those in their community on a day-to-day basis, because that's what, the average Nigerian that takes a bus may want to see. He may not understand some of the big global stories that we're telling. He just wants to understand something that concerns his local environment.
Yeah. So Mo, I think we have, your success.
There's a place for all of us.
Your success at Ebony Life has really shown us the business side of the creative industries, but also people-to-people ties. I mean, the diaspora is a huge market. We know there are almost 50 million Americans, African Americans, and then there are at least 4 million Americans that have been born in Africa, but now live in the US. And so there's this huge diaspora market. There's a people-to-people ties. How did you go about building the relationships with Westbrook or with Netflix? How did you find each other? How did those deals come to be?
It's been, I got into this business pretty late. I mean, as you know, I worked in ExxonMobil for the longest time as head of human resources, and I woke up at 40, nearly 17 years ago, and I said to myself, you know what, I'm changing careers. And everybody thought I was having a meltdown and having a midlife crisis, but I wasn't. I just decided I wanted to change focus. But it's been 10 years, really. I would say that I've spent the last 10 years, pitching African stories to these internationals. It's been a long time coming. I've been to MIPCOM. MIP TV is the largest TV market in the world. I've been going every year for the last 10 years. And literally, you're knocking on doors and people are telling you, oh, yes, we really think that's a great idea. And then, you get back and you're sending emails and no one's replying. But suddenly in 2018, the world woke up.
Well,
we did the same thing, which is just keep knocking on the doors. But what we did was our company invested in story development. And that's what I've said to local producers, is that you've got to make the investment in the stories that you want to pitch. Because if you don't have something to sell, it's like asking someone to invest in your business. If they can't see the vision, if they don't know what you're selling to them, they won't be able to invest in it. So we took a lot of time researching the stories, building the characters, building the worlds, the backdrops, and then pitching these ideas. I mean, we ended up with things that were as thick as sort of a 100-page magazine to show, you know, the depth of what we were trying to do with the backdrops and the environments and the characters and the story arcs. And that's what we were pitching, you know, and eventually they bought into it. And then as soon as we're able to do 1 or 2 or 3 deals, then now we've got people knocking on our doors and saying, we want to partner with you now, because they've seen the success we've had, you know, with what we've done with the others. So it's an easier sell now. Yeah.
Persistence certainly pays in African markets. I think all of us have experienced that.
Absolutely, it does.
Persistence. And so I want to turn and take some questions from the audience. We have a few about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and free trade. You know, what are the regulatory things that need to be in place, Aziz and Demetrius, to see you know, more investment come? And what are you looking for in these kind of agreements that you want to see added or, you know, accelerated, et cetera? We all know that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a generational project. It's humongous, but progress is being made. So what are some of the regulatory issues that you want to increase? And Demetrius, I'll start with you because you have a background in trade as well. You're at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, so you know that space.
So Aubrey, I think the one area that is critical and fundamental today is digital trade. You know, I had mentioned earlier in my remarks that digitally enabled businesses, and particularly digitally enabled small businesses, are the ones that are weathering COVID and will be really at the center of the economic recovery. And so to ensure that small businesses are able to participate in global e-commerce, you need to make sure that global e-commerce is actually able to be conducted in a you know, free and easy way. The trouble that we're seeing across the world is governments are beginning to put in place barriers to the free flow of data, whether that's in the form of data localization requirements or other restrictions on data flows. And when you wall off your data, you're essentially preventing small businesses, which are the backbone of every single economy in Africa, as well as in the United States, from recovering. And so as governments think about sort of the next step in the next generation of trade policy, digital trade agreements are the ones that, in my view, are the ones that are going to be most fundamental to powering the post-COVID economic recovery. The Africa Free Trade Agreement, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, definitely plays a role, particularly with as we think about how you implement the digital protocol. But as the United States and as the Biden-Harris administration think about what can they do more with African countries, really focusing in on digital trade, I personally think will be the thing that will be most enabling for small businesses in both the United States as well as in Africa to engage in the type of cross-border trade that we're seeing flourish so much in a post-COVID environment.
Yeah, Aziz, there was a special question to you about regulatory issues that you've had to navigate on the continent, and whether there are, you know, whether agreements like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement help in that effort.
Yeah, listen, regulation is something we and a lot of industries live with on a day-to-day basis. It's all about a positive engagement and a free and transparent engagement with our regulators, and also to a certain extent advocacy, right? You've got to be an advocate not only for yourself, your business, but also for your clients as well, and use those platforms to do that. And listen, any trading block has huge amount of benefits, right? When you can trade as a block, as opposed to an individual country, and we do have much smaller countries in Africa which find it difficult to compete at times. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the continent as a whole to be looking at it as a block and as a trading partner.
Yeah, I mean, one of the greatest constraints to investment in the region has been that it's 54 countries. And, you know, 3% of the world live in small landlocked countries, but 30% of Africans do. That, you know, there's a question about low inter-regional commerce. That's part of the reason why it's costly to move goods when you don't have ports in every, when in most countries don't have ports, when you have to move goods far from ports, when there's infrastructure, these things are high cost. And, an African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it basically exists any free trade area. You want free movement of people, which there's a lot of progress on because of the reduction of visa requirements for Africans. You want free movement of goods, which is a lot of what this Continental Free Trade Agreement is about. But you also want free movement of capital, which is what you're in the business of doing. And Demetrius as well, with this digital movement of capital and the ability to move money, remittances, inter-country, between countries, payments between businesses, between countries. All of these things can make African Continental Free Trade Agreement more of a reality. And maybe Olivier, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add the first point, right? One of the things that is very important is efficiency and cost efficiency, how you move goods and at what price, right? So having that kind of infrastructure in place, especially given the fact that we have quite a few landlocked countries, access to seaports and an efficient way to move goods should be the number one priority as well, right? When you look at putting a free trade agreement in place, you also need to provide goods to go out as well, or import goods, right? So that efficiency in terms of port logistics and just general logistics is going to be critical as well.
Yeah. Olivier, I would like to turn to you on this question. Is there anything in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement you think is super relevant to ATC's business? And then to also ask, have you really engaged with US entities, whether they be DFC, XM Bank, and what do you think's really worked with that, and what could be done better to help other companies maybe less familiar with the markets than ATC?
Yes, thank you, Aubrey. I mean, the first thing that I think is working is the public-private partnership. So what we do, together with our colleagues from other sectors coming from the US, is engaging with the local communities or local government to try to provide solutions to the needs of the citizen or the consumer. So by tapping into some of the universal funds, for instance, some of the government have been able together, with the support of US companies, to provide better connectivity. For instance, in rural areas where it's economically not viable for an operator, for a government to do that by themselves. So we've been quite successful there, I would say. The second piece is, how can we work better or closer with the US government or US supported entities to make, the transition to open, competitive and predictable business environment in some of the markets in Africa. We still have, big untapped opportunities in areas and geography where it's still very, very hard to make business. Not only for US companies, we say for international big corporations. So I think there we are starting to engage. Prosper Africa is a great initiative, which I think is helping. We work very closely to local embassies, a US representative. Exim Bank is a key actor there as well. The banks like Citibank, also provide a key interface for us in the market. More to do, but I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, for sure it is. I think outside of the large companies, if you look at the history of US foreign investment into African markets, you see it's still very dominated by large American companies, like truly global American companies that have to be everywhere in the world. And we haven't necessarily started or figured out a way to support American SMEs in this wave. And I think that's incumbent on us to think about innovations that can push out the support that exists in American agencies like DFC, et cetera. I mean, I wonder if we actually did some kind of business survey through AmChams throughout America, how many American SMEs would have ever heard of the DFC, right? So these are some of the challenges that I think exist. But given your big platforms, Olivier, with lots of different suppliers, I think, working through companies' supply chains to push out the message of investing in Africa and to find ways to engage with entities like DFC can be helpful because you have many, many suppliers in the supply chain.
Aubrey, one quick add to that. Sorry to interrupt, but that's again where digital trade becomes so relevant because it allows US small and medium-sized enterprises and US micro enterprises to be able to trade much more effectively in Africa. And as the Biden and Harris administration looks to, crafting a trade policy that focuses on the middle class, that focuses on micro and small businesses, digital trade is really a very, very efficient and productive way to go.
Definitely. Paul, I'd like to turn to you with a couple of the climate related questions. There was one around, the great climate assets of the region, say like the Congo Basin rainforests and the, Gabon rainforests. What's being kind of done to invest in these and ensure that they're safe, not only for African countries, but for the world, because we need the rainforest assets. And a second question about what's it going to take for African countries to really become producers of large scale green energy that maybe can be exported as well.
Thank you for these questions. On the Congo Basin, in 2016, when the Conference of Parties was held in Morocco, the heads of states and governments came up with 3 initiatives. One was on the Sahel, one on the island, and the third one was on the Congo Basin. So the president of Congo, Sassou Nguesso, is coordinating the initiative of the Congo Basin Blue Fund. We are working with them. About 16 countries in Central and East Africa are part of this, members of this commission. So we're working with them to see how we can support them to bring in projects that would conserve the forest and also ensure that their livelihoods are enhanced. So it's going to be a very big project. What they did is they came up with series of projects, both national and cross-national, that would help conserve and also preserve the forests in Gabon all the way to Burundi. So we're working with them, one, to provide them with policy environments and also enabling environment, and then project proposals that would support them. In terms of renewable energy, we have a series of projects that have been approved in Africa for energy, from Southern Africa all the way to West Africa, with the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and also the West African Bank. Currently, we are also working on another project, which is the Great Green Wall, which would really, and that is in the Sahel for almost 17 countries, to really tap in renewable energy, greening the whole Sahel from Dakar all the way to Djibouti, in terms of really enhancing the ecosystem, reforesting them, providing livelihood to the communities, most of whom are small-scale farmers. And we would also be providing them with renewable energy. So Africa has the largest share of our portfolio in terms of financing, both in nominal terms and grant equivalent terms.
And Pa, thank you again for joining at this late hour. Everyone who's, we appreciate a virtual round of applause for being up at 3 in the morning in Korea. So many people don't know that the Green Climate Fund is based in Korea. So thank you again, Pa, for joining at this crazy hour for you. Mo, we had one question for you about, what do you think government policy, whether that be, US government policy or say Nigerian government policy, needs to do to change to be embracing of the creative industries? Are there any kind of regulatory changes that you would like to see?
I think one of the challenges in Africa generally is that there is so much work to be done in so many other sectors that I often wonder how our sector can become a priority. Of course, I would love for it to become a priority, but there's education, there's health, there's transportation. But we've seen the impact that our sector has had, on the economy, that I think it does deserve to be given, some priority, because, the industry has grown by those that are within the industry. A lot of what's happened has happened out of the passion and the love that people in the industry have. So is there anything, I know that, the Bank of Industry and recently the Central Bank also started, a fund whereby you could access the fund. But, but one thing is that it is still a business. And, I think some of the opinion that they should be looking to get grants and to be given, you can't give, it's like any sector, it's got to be run, using the same, business principles like any other sector. So I kind of, yes, I know that culture is culture, and, different governments have invested in culture and, sort of the arts and things like that. And yes, should we be doing more of that? It would be great to do more of that. But I think in terms of the sector standing on its own and growing, we're going to have to look for those investments from all over the world that are going to say, I want to come and partner with Ebony Life or Ebony Life 2 or Ebony Life's competitor to grow the sector and to collaborate. We've got to use the same business principles that's used in any sector, because if not, it's not going to be sustainable. It has to be sustainable. So those are my own personal opinions on how, government can provide an enabling environment. You can give tax rebates. You can, you can give tax breaks. You can give, in South Africa, I know the DTI work, you can sort of go and shoot in South Africa, and you get all sorts of rebates. Yes, there can be more of that. There can be more incentives to get the industry sort of working. But I think the same business principles need to apply. Can we get cheaper money? It would be great to get cheaper money. There is some cheaper money out. Get more, because we know the sector can grow, and it can certainly be, can empower a lot more people. When we look at the number of young people that we have in our population today. Yeah.
Thank you, Mo. So with just our last few minutes here, I'm going to turn to Demetrius, Olivier, and Aziz and say, okay, we are at this moment, this unique moment, as I outlined in my report. We do have an opportunity. The Biden-Harris administration is shaping policy. Are there any big ideas you have that you would like to see realized? Demetrius, I'll start with you, since you've already kind of said something on digital trade. What would an e-commerce or digital trade initiative for Africa look like? And then I'll go to Aziz, and then we'll end with Olivier.
I think, Aubrey, what the US and Africa should focus on is, how do we create a digital economy that's inclusive? How do we get digital enabling infrastructure into Africa that will allow small businesses, consumers, and the financially underserved to really participate in what's going to be an explosion, a post-COVID explosion of digital transformation. So that's what the focus should be. I think the Biden-Harris administration has the opportunity to do it in several parts. It can be through, a freestanding digital trade agreement with African economies, as well as a much more focused digital infrastructure play through the DFC and other agencies. So that's what I think I would recommend strongly.
Yes, I agree with you on the digital focus, digital infrastructure. I think it's an area where the US can really shine and builds on a lot of our competitive strengths. So Aziz, I'll turn to you. Is there a big idea that you would love to see?
I don't want to steal Olivier's thunder, but I think infrastructure is going to be very key. And it's not just about digital infrastructure, there's physical infrastructure, which is of great need. And I think from a US administration perspective, it's a great opportunity, I think, to be involved, whether it's through DFC, through many other agencies that the US has, to enable the mobilization of capital in a cost-efficient manner. I think that's just a huge advantage that the US has. And at the same time the current time presents a tremendous opportunity in this space specifically.
Yeah, and to address the real risks. We were talking earlier that there's often a view of African markets through the lens of risk in the US. And it's not to say that there aren't any risks. There's real currency risks of doing business in the region. There's a challenge of education of the markets because there's so many. There are real risks, and hopefully the companies can engage with US agencies to address those real risks and education gaps, so then we can get on to focusing on the opportunity part. Olivier, what would you like to see from a kind of Biden-Harris administration big Africa policy idea?
I think the challenge for the new administration, how do you harness the collective intelligence, from a US standpoint, to make an impact? I think many US companies, and many of those are represented here, have been successful so far to do business in Africa. We probably can do more. I think there's a leadership role that the US administration, can have there. And And of course, a sustainable digital transformation in Africa is probably a good agenda. I add the sustainable because, clearly in our sector in particular, it has to do with energy management and operating, telecom equipment. And definitely this is both a challenge and opportunities there because of lack of electricity. So I think we have a common agenda there, definitely, the companies that are present in this forum to look at that together with the government.
Yeah, I think there is definitely deep synergies between Power Africa, because you need to power the digital world, right? So you need the Power Africa that's going to come and help to ensure there's electricity, and the digital infrastructure initiative that was originally launched at OPIC Connect Africa that could certainly be enlarged under the DFC. And then also the financing to go with it and the digital finance fintech players. So there's real synergies that we can build on. So I want to thank everyone, first my esteemed panel for joining and spending the time today, especially Pa, so late for you, Mo, it's late for you. It's really a pleasure to have this conversation. I want to thank the audience as well for taking the time, and to say to continue to follow this discussion and debate. I'm open and reachable on the report. Everyone can download it from the Atlantic Council's website. And we will be having many events. We are relaunching, we're in the process of relaunching the Africa Center and have stunning events lined up in May. One of them is on climate finance and making climate finance inclusive and ensuring that African countries have access to the climate finance resources. So we invite you all back to our next events, and thank you for joining today.